General Hospital will reveal Portia never imagined that an ordinary evening at the hospital would mark the turning point for a calculated and merciless plan of retaliation. While reviewing patient data to finalize a series of internal reports, she stumbled upon an encrypted file labeled simply as Patient, Drew. Normally cautious and professional, Portia would have looked the other way, but an uneasy intuition urged her to take a closer look. As she bypassed the layers of security, what she uncovered left her breathless. Drew was harboring a brain tumor located in his frontal lobe, an area responsible for judgment, behavior, and emotional regulation. Even more alarming, the file revealed that in the past, Drew had been implanted with a neural microchip, likely part of a covert military operation. While the file claimed the chip was no longer active, it also noted that regular monitoring was recommended due to possible long-term effects. This wasn't just a routine medical concern, it was a ticking time bomb. If exposed, Drew's ambitions in politics and business would disintegrate overnight. Worse, he could be deemed a public safety threat and placed under strict medical surveillance. Portia, who had endured intimidation and manipulation from Drew in the past, now found herself holding the ultimate leverage. Knowing the danger of such sensitive information, she immediately contacted Curtis. Both of them had personal reasons to want Drew out of their lives. They agreed, the only way to protect themselves was to strike first, quietly and strategically. Fate stepped in at just the right moment when Nina, driven by desperation and heartbreak, inadvertently became the final piece of their puzzle. Having faced constant rejection from Willow, especially after learning that her daughter intended to move in permanently with Drew and the children, Nina spiraled into a state of emotional distress. Acting on impulse and pain, she used the spare key Willow had once given her and quietly entered Drew's home while he was away. Her initial intent was unclear, even to herself, but curiosity and suspicion led her to Drew's office, where she discovered a safe hidden behind a framed painting. After several attempts using significant dates in Drew's life, Scout's birthday, Oscar's death, she finally unlocked the safe. What she found inside shocked her to the core. A thick folder filled with confidential business documents, off-the-record contracts, overseas wire transfers, and altered financial statements. The deeper she read, the darker the implications became. Several documents linked Drew to fraudulent business dealings, money funneled through shell companies, manipulated nonprofit funding, and suspicious ties to political campaigns that could suggest financial misconduct, even potential money laundering. Some agreements bore forged signatures, and others revealed Drew's direct involvement in exploiting funds meant for veterans' aid for personal or political gain. Nina, stunned but resolute, brought the documents directly to Portia. As Portia laid them beside the damning medical records, she realized that together, they now held the means to destroy Drew completely, from both a legal and moral standpoint. When Curtis was brought in on the findings, his shock quickly turned into determination. They now had evidence that Drew wasn't just a medical liability, he was a corrupt businessman hiding behind a carefully constructed public image. With their goals aligned, an unlikely alliance between Nina, Portia, and Curtis was born. Each had their own motivation, Portia seeking protection and control, Curtis wanting to safeguard his family's future, and Nina desperate to reclaim her place in Willow's life, but together, they had one target, Drew. They didn't act immediately. Instead, they devised a methodical strategy. Curtis began leaking subtle hints about questionable financial connections, Portia planted medical concerns during private hospital briefings, and Nina quietly pulled strings within the media, fueling outside investigations and whispers in the political scene. Willow, initially defensive and loyal, soon noticed the cracks in Drew's demeanor. The erratic behavior, evasive answers, and emotional instability were impossible to ignore. She began asking questions, first to Drew, then to others, and each response only deepened her unease. When she finally pieced together fragments of the truth, the weight of betrayal overwhelmed her. The man she had trusted with her heart and her children's future was not the person he claimed to be. As the pressure mounted, Drew began to unravel. Rumors swirled in the business world. Political allies distanced themselves. Clients canceled contracts. The microchip he thought was deactivated may have begun reactivating, or perhaps it was just the psychological toll, but Drew began to lose control, hallucinations, paranoia, and uncontrollable outbursts. Meanwhile, the Alliance remained silent, letting Drew self-destruct under the weight of his own secrets. He, who once stood at the peak of influence and admiration, was now nothing more than a cautionary tale, one undone not by a single scandal, but by the convergence of illness, corruption, and betrayal. And Nina, Portia, and Curtis. They didn't need revenge. They only needed the truth, and it did the rest. Determined not to fall into a position of weakness in the high-stakes power game Drew was dominating, Portia acted quickly. The moment she realized the explosive nature of the medical file she had accessed, she contacted Curtis in confidence. Her voice, though composed, carried the weight of urgency and fear. They both understood the magnitude of what she had uncovered. If Drew ever found out that she had accessed his sealed medical records, he would not hesitate to weaponize that information against her. He could tarnish her reputation, destroy her career, and paint her as an unethical doctor who violated patient confidentiality for personal gain. The stakes were too high for inaction. There was only one viable path forward: strike first. Not recklessly, but with precision and preparation. If they were going to take down a man like Drew, who had charm, influence, and a growing network of political allies, they needed irrefutable evidence that could corner him beyond any defense. And then, as if fate had aligned itself with their cause, Nina entered the picture. Nina's arrival was unexpected but perfectly timed. Still reeling from the emotional fracture between her and Willow, and desperate to claw her way back into her daughter's life, Nina had stumbled across a series of business documents hidden inside Drew's personal safe, documents that exposed his deep involvement in financial misconduct. What began as a desperate, emotional act became a turning point. She now held something powerful, something real. And when she brought those files to Portia, it was clear: this wasn't just an isolated discovery, it was the missing piece of a much larger puzzle. Portia saw the opportunity immediately. For her, this wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about reclaiming control. She had spent too long walking on eggshells around Drew, watching as he manipulated those around him while cloaking himself in false virtue. Now, with both medical evidence and financial proof in their hands, she had the means to break free from his grip once and for all. Curtis, on the other hand, viewed Drew as a dangerous influence not just to Portia, but to the stability of his entire family. He had witnessed firsthand how Drew had begun to entangle himself in their affairs, using charm and influence to mask deeper intentions. For Curtis, removing Drew wasn't just strategic, it was necessary. And Nina, though her motivations had initially been rooted in pain and desperation, quickly realized the broader implications. If this plan succeeded, not only would she neutralize Drew's hold on Willow, but she might finally pull her daughter back from the emotional and psychological distance that had grown between them. The alliance among the three was born out of shared necessity, but it evolved into something more formidable. They didn't move recklessly. Every step was calculated, every conversation deliberate. Curtis began laying the groundwork through subtle leaks and quiet inquiries, nudging key figures to take a closer look at Drew's business dealings. Portia engaged her medical and administrative connections, planting seeds of doubt about Drew's health and mental stability. Nina, with her access to the media and her sharp instincts for narrative, began steering the public conversation toward whispers of scandal, never pointing directly, but always guiding suspicion in the right direction. Together, they formed a silent force, unified by purpose. And as they executed their plan with meticulous care, they left no trail, no fingerprints, only rising tension and a growing sense of unease in the world surrounding Drew. What he didn't know was that the trap had already been set. As the calculated release of information began to ripple through Drew's carefully maintained world, the cracks in his polished facade deepened. Doubt crept in from all corners. Colleagues who once championed him now hesitated before speaking his name. Business partners began to pull back, citing vague concerns about stability and credibility. The rumors weren't direct accusations, but they didn't need to be. They were precise, insidious, and effective. Drew, once the picture of control and confidence, found himself on unstable ground, grasping for answers he couldn't provide. Among those most shaken was Willow. The one person who had stood by him unwaveringly, who believed in his integrity even when others began to whisper behind closed doors. But now, even she could no longer ignore the signs. Nina's subtle suggestions echoed in her mind, and though she had initially dismissed them as manipulative ploys, she couldn't silence her growing discomfort. Something felt wrong, deeply, undeniably wrong. Determined to get to the truth without alerting Drew, Willow began her own quiet investigation. She replayed moments in her mind, those nights when Drew had abruptly ended conversations, the occasions he cancelled medical appointments without explanation, and the instances he had snapped under pressure over the smallest questions. She reviewed old documents, cross-referenced schedules, and paid attention to details she had once overlooked. Everything Nina had implied began to align with the reality in front of her. It wasn't just one red flag, it was a pattern. The shift in Willow's demeanor didn't go unnoticed. Drew, already paranoid and spiraling, sensed the change. Her quiet distance, her cautious words, her lingering glances when he spoke, it was enough to confirm his fear. She no longer believed in him. And that, more than the rumors or the investigations, rattled him to the core. Cornered and unraveling, Drew's arrogance faded. The once commanding presence now appeared fragile, desperate. In a moment of emotional collapse, he reached out, not to confront, but to plead. He turned to Nina, to Curtis, and finally to Portia, abandoning the pride that had long defined him. There was no grand speech, no defense of his innocence. Only sorrow in his eyes, and the quiet, broken plea for forgiveness. He asked for understanding. For second chances. For mercy. But those he turned to had seen too much. They had been manipulated, hurt, and discarded by Drew when it served his ambition. Now, with the power reversed and the truth exposed, forgiveness was not so easily granted. When Willow was finally confronted with the truth, it hit her with a force she hadn't expected. The evidence was overwhelming, the inconsistencies too glaring to ignore. The man she had loved, trusted, and built a future with had been living behind a mask, one carefully constructed, meticulously maintained, and dangerously deceptive. At first, she tried to justify it, telling herself there had to be a reason. But as more pieces fell into place, his erratic behavior, the avoidance of medical checkups, the secret of business dealings, Willow could no longer deny what her heart refused to believe. Drew had lied. Over and over again. And now, the consequences were staring both of them in the face. The betrayal shattered her. It wasn't just about the lies or the cover-ups, it was the realization that she had been fighting to protect someone who had been manipulating her trust from the very beginning. The heartbreak gave way to clarity, and that clarity became resolve. Willow made the painful decision to walk away. No more excuses. No more shielding him from judgment. She turned her back on Drew, not in anger, but in cold, quiet devastation. Her withdrawal was the final blow Drew hadn't anticipated. And with Willow stepping away, the alliance between Nina, Portia, and Curtis solidified with unshakable strength. Each of them had once operated with caution, unsure of how far to go, but now, with Willow no longer defending Drew, their position became untouchable. They didn't need to hide in shadows anymore, the truth had done the work for them. The whispers had turned into conversation. The suspicions had become facts. Ava, who had once tried to warn Portia against letting fear lead her into reckless decisions, now stood on the sidelines, watching as everything unraveled just as she had feared. But even she couldn't deny that Drew had brought much of this upon himself. Pride had blinded him. He believed he was untouchable, that his charisma and influence could silence any threat. But it hadn't been his enemies who destroyed him, it was the people closest to him, the ones he had underestimated and betrayed. And so, Drew, once proud, once powerful, once certain of his place at the top, now stood at the edge of a personal abyss, stripped of allies, exposed for who he truly was. His fall was not sudden, but slow and inevitable, orchestrated not by vengeance, but by truth and consequence. Portia, in the moment of victory, remained composed, eerily so. She sat alone in her office as the final pieces of the plan fell into place, her expression unreadable, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The storm had passed, but there was no visible relief, no sigh of triumph. She knew better than to celebrate too soon. This wasn't a game that ended with one checkmate, it was a long and dangerous match played in silence, where every move had its consequence and every ally could one day become a threat. She had outmaneuvered Drew, exposed the secrets he buried beneath his polished image, and watched as his carefully constructed world collapsed from within. But Portia wasn't naive. She understood that Drew was only one obstacle in a much larger landscape of deceit and ambition. The moment she let her guard down, someone else would be ready to strike. Her victory was not a declaration of dominance, it was simply a moment of survival in a world where control was everything. Yet despite the weight of what had transpired, one truth brought her quiet strength: this time, she was not the one who fell. She had endured the manipulation, the threats, the silent wars waged behind closed doors, and she had emerged on the other side with her dignity and power intact. She had reclaimed her place, not through vengeance, but through precision and patience. And though the future remained uncertain, Portia knew that she had changed. No longer the woman who waited for the storm to pass, she had become the storm itself, silent, relentless, and devastating. With Curtis and Nina now aligned beside her, the foundation was strong, the strategy sharp. Whatever came next, she would be ready. The game was far from over. And the next chapter would only raise the stakes higher. Stay tuned for what lies ahead.